Once upon a time, the lobster was so common it was considered the cockroach of the sea, and was most commonly fed to prisoners, apprentices, and slaves. But just as Cinderella went from scullery maid to princess bride, so too did the lobster rise in the seafood ranks to become a delicacy that is now prized all over the world. In 2016 alone, ITE Food and Drink says China imported more than $500 million worth of frozen and fresh lobster products. China's appetite for lobster is so immense, in fact, that the country looks to fishermen across several markets in order to satisfy its craving, including the US, Canada, and New Zealand. For the last few years, lobsters have been making the journey from sea to table on chartered flights, particularly around the Lunar New Year when demand reaches a seasonal high. The journey isn't cheap, but they are seen as a necessity so suppliers can meet the appetites of Chinese diners, who want their seafood delivered as fresh as possible. According to the South China Morning Post, between January to March of 2019, China imported 12,600 tons of lobster. But thanks to the initial outbreak of COVID-19 in China, the world's lobsters have ended up staying where they were, driving prices down to far below the normal asking price.
Especially through the Chinese New Year, it just fell at a really bad time. That's our busiest 2 or 3 weeks of the year, all year.
The sharp decline in Chinese demand has led to oversupply in markets whose producers had been sending their lobsters abroad. Marianne LaCroix, who is the executive director of the Maine Lobster Marketing Collaboration, tells NBC, when there is a slowdown both in dining out and in shipping in markets outside the US, that could cause disruptions in the supply chain. Even though they'll likely find customers at home, lobster producers aren't happy with the drastic drop in demand, because even domestic prices have also dropped as a result. The discounts vary depending on where exactly you are. In Northern California, you might expect to spend about $20 per pound. That's half of the $40 you would normally pay for a lobster in that part of the country. Generally, however, the prices for lobsters are at the lowest levels producers have seen in 4 years. Seafood distributor Casey Peterson told USA Today, "We were able to offer a product that we normally weren't able to because it was too expensive. The prices went down a lot, so we're able to offer it at a much cheaper price." While Maine lobster growers saw their prices decline, the domestic price drop hasn't been quite as dramatic. NBC says the average price for a Maine half is about $14.50, which is only average or slightly lower. This is because peak lobster season hasn't hit Maine yet, a time at which prices are higher than usual anyway. Exports from Maine to outside the US, however, have taken a serious blow. One Maine producer says she saw orders go from 1,000 boxes a week to 120 boxes since the outbreak of coronavirus. Maine lobster grower Stephanie Nadeau told Bloomberg, "This is like a fatal blow. I'm about to lay off most of my employees." But the ripple effect triggered by COVID-19 is hurting Canadian lobster exporters more than it's hurting those in the US. When China began taxing lobsters in 2018, Canada stepped in to fill the void, and until coronavirus, it was sending them around 1.5 million pounds of shellfish a week. But the coronavirus has put a stop to Canadian lobster exports, and the Canadians have, in turn, begun selling their lobsters in the US. Tiffany Chase, spokesperson for Canada's Halifax Stanfield International Airport, told The Star, typically 7 to 10 cargo flights would be transporting fresh seafood products into the Asian market on a weekly basis. About a month ago, one of our cargo carriers advised they'd be temporarily suspending their shipments that go directly into China as a result of the impact of coronavirus, and they would have had 2 to 3 of those weekly flights. But it isn't bad news for everyone. New Zealand's lobsters have met an even weirder fate. In that country, authorities have had to help exporters release some of their lobsters back into the water. Talk about a lucky escape. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more MASH videos about the finest foods are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.